There are few passages in the Bible as loved as Psalm 23. People read it when they are afraid, when they are grieving, when they feel uncertain about tomorrow. But I wonder how many of us have truly stopped to hear what Psalm 23 is really saying. Let's read it together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Before we go deeper into Psalm 23, you need to know the man who wrote it. His name was King David. Long before he became a king, he was a young shepherd. Not just a young shepherd, but a brave one. David would become a warrior, a king, a man who loved God deeply. The Bible describes David as a man after God's own heart. Think about that for a moment. A man after God's own heart. David knew victory. He knew fear. He knew joy. He knew grief. He knew pain. He knew waiting. He knew betrayal. He knew restoration. Yet through every season of his life, he learned the same lesson. God's faithfulness never changed. God's mercy never failed. And God never stopped being his shepherd. David never says life will be easy. He talks about valleys. He talks about enemies. He talks about fear. He talks about dark places. Yet somehow, this has become one of the most peaceful chapters in the entire Bible. Why? What is it about these words that has carried people for generations? What did David see that so many of us missed? Nothing about David's words was accidental. David chose every word with intention. Every sentence, every picture, every comparison was intentional, because David wasn't simply writing a beautiful poem. He was telling the story of a God he had come to know. And if we want to understand Psalm 23, we have to understand why David told that story the way he did. The answer is hidden in one word that holds this entire chapter together. One word that will change the way you see this chapter forever. To find it, we have to go back before David wore a crown, back before the battles, back before the songs, back before the palace, back to the quiet fields, back to where David's story began. David was the youngest son of a man named Jesse. He had 7 older brothers. While his brothers carried other family responsibilities, David spent his days in the quiet fields, caring for his father's sheep. He guided them. He searched for the ones that wandered. He stayed with the ones that were weak. And when danger came, he stood between the sheep and whatever threatened them. This was David's life, before the battles, before the throne, before the songs. Then one day, everything changed. Jesse asked David to take food to his brothers. They were serving in the army of Israel. When David arrived, he found the army standing still. Across the valley, a giant named Goliath challenged them. Morning and evening, he came out, mocking the army of Israel, challenging anyone to fight him. But no one stepped forward, not even King Saul. David listened. He looked around, and he couldn't understand why everyone was so afraid. David could see the fear. He could hear it in their voices. Everyone saw the same giant, but David saw something they had forgotten. This was not the first battle he had ever faced. Long before Goliath, predators came for his father's sheep. A lion, a bear. David went after them. He fought them. Now another enemy stood before him. not in the fields, but in a valley, not before sheep, but before an entire nation. The soldiers stood still. King Saul stood still. No one moved. Then David stepped forward. The giant laughed at him. David picked up 5 stones. He placed one in his sling. He swung it. The stone struck Goliath. The giant fell. That day, Israel won the battle, and David's life changed forever. After the battle, everything changed. David became known throughout Israel. The same people who once overlooked him now knew his name. He served King Saul. He fought for Israel, and wherever he went, he was successful. The people celebrated him. They sang about him. But not everyone was happy. The songs that honored David filled Saul with jealousy. The man who David served became the man who wanted him dead. So David ran, leaving behind the palace, his home, and everything he had known. David became a fugitive. The man who once defeated a giant was now running for his life. He found shelter in a cave. It should have been a place of hiding, but it did not stay empty. One by one, people began to find him. Men who were carrying burdens of their own. Men who had nowhere else to go. Men who were searching for hope. They came to David, not because he was living in a palace, not because he wore a crown, not because he had all the answers. They came because somehow they believed he could lead. Saul never stopped looking for David. The search continued from one place to another, until one day, Saul entered a cave, not knowing David and his men were hiding inside. The men around David whispered. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The king was within reach. One step, one strike, and everything would be over. David walked quietly toward Saul. He came close enough to end it, but he didn't. Instead, he cut off a corner of Saul's robe and walked away. David's men could not understand it. The man who had hunted him was finally within his reach. Yet David chose mercy, not revenge. When Saul left the cave, David followed at a distance. Then he called out to him, "My lord the king." Saul turned around. David held up the corner of the robe, the piece he had cut away. "If I wanted to harm you, I could have, but I didn't. There is no evil in my heart against you." For a moment, everything became quiet. Saul looked at David, and he wept. He knew David had spared his wife. He knew David had returned good for evil. For that moment, the chase stopped. But David's journey was far from over. Long before any of this, before the caves, before Saul hunted David, before he stood before the giant, when he was still in the quiet fields, there was a day almost no one noticed. A prophet named Samuel came to the house of Jesse, David's father. God had sent him there to choose the next king of Israel. One by one, Jesse presented his sons, strong, capable, impressive, but none of them was the one God had chosen. Samuel asked Jesse if he had another son. Jesse replied, "Yes, David is in the fields, caring for the sheep." So they sent for David. When David stood before Samuel, God said, "This is the one." Samuel poured the oil over David's head and left. David was anointed as the next king of Israel. Then David returned to the quiet fields, back to the sheep. Years had passed since that day. David had spared Saul's life, but his journey was far from over. He was still a fugitive. Saul was still king, and David was still waiting. The promise had not changed, but neither had his circumstances. Then one day, everything changed. A messenger arrived with news from the battlefield. King Saul had fallen. The man who had spent years pursuing David was gone. But David did not celebrate. He mourned. He wept. He honored the king who had tried to take his life. Soon after, the people of Judah came, and they anointed David as their king. David was finally king. The years of running were over. The throne he had waited for was finally his. The people looked up to him. Time passed. David fought many battles. He led Israel to war, and each time they returned victorious. Israel became stronger. Their enemies grew weaker. Then another battle came. His army marched out, but this time David stayed behind. He remained in Jerusalem. One evening, as he walked across the roof of the palace, he noticed a woman beating. Her name was Bathsheba. David sent for Bathsheba, and they had an affair. Time passed. Then one day, a message reached David. Bathsheba was expecting a child. David knew the child was his. What had been done in secret could no longer remain hidden. So David searched for a way to hide it. He called Uriah home. Uriah was one of David's soldiers and Bathsheba's husband. David wanted Uriah to go home and spend time with his wife, so everyone would believe the child belonged to Uriah. But Uriah refused. His fellow soldiers were still at war, and he would not rest while they remained on the battlefield. David's plan had failed, so he made another one. He invited Uriah and sent him back to the battlefield with a letter for the commander. David ordered that Uriah be placed where the battle was the most dangerous. Then everyone else was told to pull back, so Uriah would be killed in the battle. And he was. When the news of Uriah's death reached David, he believed everything was finally hidden. But it was not. God had seen everything, so God sent the prophet Nathan to David. There were two men living in the same town. One owned many sheep and many cattle. The other had only one little lamb. He cared for it like his own child. It was all he had. One day, a visitor came to the rich man's house. Instead of taking one of his own sheep, he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for his guest. When David heard the story, he became angry. The man who did this deserves to die. Then Nathan looked at David and said, "You are that man?" David said nothing. He knew Prophet Nathan was right. He had sinned against God. There was nothing left to hide, nothing left to defend. David confessed what he had done, and he asked God for mercy. The child born from the affair did not survive. David mourned. He wept. He prayed. Then he stood up. He washed himself. He worshipped God. This time, there was nothing left to hide. Just a man who knew he had sinned against God. Time passed. David continued to lead Israel. He was still king. He still carried the weight of a nation. His past could not be changed. But he did not walk away from God. He kept coming back to God again and again. He prayed. He worshipped. He listened. He kept trusting God. Even after everything, he never stopped coming back to God. Time passed. David continued to rule Israel, but trouble found him again. This time, it did not come from another nation. It did not come from another king. It came from his own house. One of David's sons, Absalom, won the hearts of the people. Little by little, more people began to follow him. Then one day, Absalom raised an army against his own father. David did not want Jerusalem to become a battlefield, so David fled the city. And once again, David was running for his life. Once again, David had to leave everything behind: his home, his throne, his people. The future was uncertain. He did not know if he would ever return. The road was long, His heart was weary, and once again, David had nothing to hold on to except God. Time passed. David was still not back in Jerusalem. He was still not on his throne. Absalom was still king. A battle could no longer be avoided, but David could not bring himself to fight his own son. The men who remained loyal to David went instead. Before they left, David said, "Be gentle with Absalom for my sake." Then he waited. The battle began. David's men defeated Absalom's army. As Absalom tried to escape, he was caught in a tree. David's soldiers found him and killed him. When the news reached David, David wept. David mourned. He wished he had died instead of his son. Years passed. David grew older. The battles became memories. The victories became stories. His strength was no longer what it used to be. He had walked through victory. He had walked through failure. He had known joy. He had known sorrow. And through it all, he kept coming back to God. David had lived a long life. He had seen more than most men ever would. He had been a shepherd, a warrior, a fugitive, a king. He had fallen. He had risen. He had failed. He had returned. Now, as he looked back on his life, one truth became clear. He remembered the boy in the field, the youngest of 8 brothers. He remembered the lion and the bear. He remembered Goliath. He remembered the years spent running, the caves, the battles, the losses. He remembered the throne. So much had happened since those days, and now he understood something. He knew what a shepherd was. He had been one. He knew that a shepherd stayed close to his sheep. He watched over them when they could not protect themselves. He led them when they did not know where to go. He went after them when they wandered, and he did not leave them simply because the road became difficult. David knew this. He had lived it. But as he looked back on his own life, he began to see something he had never seen before. There were times he did not know where to go. There were times he had to run. There were times he had nowhere to hide. There were times he had everything. And there were times he had almost nothing. Yet somehow, he had always been led. He had always been protected. He had always been brought through. And suddenly, the word he had chosen years ago did not feel like a metaphor anymore. It felt like his life. David had spent his life thinking he was the one leading. He had led sheep. He had led men. He had led an army. He had led a nation. But looking back, he could see that there were many moments when he was not the one leading at all. There were moments when he did not know where the next step would take him. There were moments when the only thing he could do was keep moving, and yet the next step always came. The road was not always easy. The valley was not always peaceful, but he was never without a shepherd. Perhaps that was why he said, "The Lord is my shepherd," and did not say, "The Lord is my protector. The Lord is my defender." He said, "The Lord is my shepherd." For the first time, David could look back and see his life differently. The boy who once watched over sheep, who spent his childhood leading them, had spent his whole life being led. He had not always known where he was going. He had not always understood why the road looked the way it did. But somehow, he was always being led somewhere, through the wilderness, through the caves, through the battles, through the throne, through his failures, through his losses. Even when he could not see the way forward, he was never left without a way. And perhaps that was the truth David finally understood. He had spent his life thinking he was the shepherd, only to realize he had been the sheep all along. Maybe that is why Psalm 23 is one of the most comforting chapters in the Bible. David was not writing about a life without trouble. He was writing about a life where he was never alone, and that was enough. And maybe that is why these words still speak to us, because life does not always go the way we planned. There will be moments when we do not know what comes next. There will be seasons when we are waiting and nothing seems to change. There will be grief we never saw coming, disappointments we never prepared for, and exhaustion from carrying too much for too long. There may be days when we feel lost, and valleys we never expected to walk through, and when we find ourselves in places like these, we may not know what comes next. The truth is, we do not need to know the whole road. We only need to know who walks it with us. Maybe you are in a season you do not understand. Maybe you are waiting for something to change. Maybe you are carrying a loss you never expected. Maybe you are exhausted from being strong for too long. Maybe you are standing at a road you have never walked before. You do not know what comes next, and you do not have to. You are not the one who sees the whole road. You are not the one who knows what lies ahead. You only need to know who is walking with you, who is leading you, who is shepherding you, because the Lord is your shepherd. So now, let us take Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The boy who once watched over sheep had finally understood. He had been the sheep all along, and the Lord had been his shepherd. If this reminded you that the Lord is your shepherd, type, "The Lord is my shepherd," in the comments. Like and share this with someone who needs this reminder. For more videos like this, subscribe to Just Selah. Rest is here.